Thanks, Eric. Friends, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this conversation with one of the founders of the Weekly Standard, Alav HaShalom, former speechwriter for President Reagan and President George H.W. Bush, columnist at the New York Post, podcast host, television analyst, and since 2009, the editor of commentary. John Podhoretz, welcome back to the Jewish Leadership Conference.
Thanks.
So listen, this is not especially a happy subject that it's our task to discuss now. The fate of the universities and the challenges they pose to conservative students and Jewish students. I thought maybe we should just set the table by beginning with the picture of the university, the icon of the university as it is in most people's minds. The university has had an extraordinarily important role in the imagination of Jewish immigrants and Jews in America. Why don't we just begin there?
Sure. Well, I think maybe the central moment in the acculturation and assimilation of American Jewry came in the late 1950s when, as a response to many cultural and social trends, but primarily the beginning of the space race, the quotas at the, particularly the Ivy League institutions that had limited Jewish enrollment to around 15, 16, 17% were dropped entirely. And I think that moment, 1957 to 1961, 1962, represented the moment for American Jewry when American Jews said, we are here, this is our country, this is the place that has accepted us like nowhere else has accepted us. The barriers, the walls, the things that have prevented Jews from reaching the summits of societies in which they had lived for 2,000 years were basically all but evanescing. And so, aside from everything else, aside from the importance that Jews have placed on education in the course of our people's existence. As a sociological matter, the complete opening of educational institutions to Jewish participation was the fundamental moment of change in which Jews became part of the American elite. And so 3 generations ago, that was the transition into full American citizenship and leadership.
And that would suggest that it had a role at that time of strengthening the Jewish community, that it was an added benefit. In fact, maybe the most important thing to enter into full membership of American society, the participation in the universities. It seems like over the last many decades, that's changed.
Well, in some ways it's changed, in some ways it hasn't. You know, if you sort of think about it, we now sit here in 2021, and there is a struggle going on in jurisprudence and in the universities in general about the question of whether or not there is active discrimination against Asian Americans. Lawsuit against Harvard, a coming lawsuit against Yale, discovery in the course of the Harvard suit that it is in fact unquestionable that that Asians seem to be held back, that they require SAT scores and general scores higher than other people, and that in general they are considered it's thought that they don't contribute in the same way, they don't form the same kind of community that these institutions want, right? Well, so what we have here is the same kind of argument against Asian Americans that was proffered against Jews in the first half of the 20th century. They're just not us. It's not quite the world that we want to have around us. We're trying to create a community of leaders and a community of like-minded people, and these are kind of alien, and you know, obviously they're very skilled, they're very talented, but it's not that our institution is after different kinds of things. And one has wondered at the hesitation or inability of the Jewish community not to come back and say, we were discriminated against the same way that Asians are being discriminated against. this is a horror, this is a terrible thing, and it must be stopped, until you realize that if there is a system of privilege at these schools that involves children of alumni, children of donors who get preference and legacies and all of that, it's 3 generations since the quotas were dropped and Jewish participation at these schools went from 15, 16, 17% in the course of the 60s in particular to 30, 40% in some of these cases. And these are the grandchildren and maybe even the great-grandchildren of, maybe not the great-grandchildren, but of the people who went to college, right? If you went to college in 1961 or something like that at Harvard or Yale or any of these schools, you would now be in your late 70s and your grandchildren would be going there. And Jews now benefit from the same system of privilege. So this is more like a pulling up the ladder behind you. So maybe the institutions themselves have changed because of a certain type of organized hostility, let's say, to Zionism and Jewish particularism in some ways. But sociologically, Jews have become part of the problem of the meritocracy and not part of the solution.
Of course, stepping onto the campus and inhabiting the experience of a student there, I want to just bring our listeners into some of the challenges that Jewish students face confronting that very kind of anti-particularism, anti-Zionism you were just mentioning.
Right. Okay, so we all know, or literate people, I'm sure most of the people who are attending this virtual conference know that the campuses have been a hotbed of particular anti-Israel activism. And in some ways, the more elite and the more august the institution, the more it is likely to have been in some ways, shapes or forms disrupted or interrupted by anti-Israel activity, not only by students or by student groups, but by professors, by the professoriate who write about the Middle East and Israel in a fashion that is more likely to be hostile and dismissive and ideologically nasty. And then, of course, student groups that have been organizing to boycott Israeli products from the West Bank, trying to get Jewish student leaders banned from leadership positions because their values are not consonant with the values that should be expressed by the student government, and that sort of thing. So we've all read and seen and heard about that. And obviously, it's a terrible thing. I think there's also been a pretty remarkable, I think if you had told me in 2010, 2011, that there would have been the kind of blowback to the BDS movement that has seen it not gain purchase because the Jewish community did fight back, because there was really some sensational organizing done at the campus level, at the college level, by groups like Hillel and others, but to fight BDS and to fight faculty efforts to impose anti-Israel ideas and make them sort of like the law of the land at these universities. I thought that this was an absolute lead pipe cinch, that we would see most campuses, most schools compelled to divest from investments in Israel and things like that, and that simply didn't happen because, of course, the notion of boycotting, academic boycotting, is itself so anathematic to the academic project, even among corrupt academics, that it was very hard, I think, to make the argument. So even though I do want to emphasize that the anti-Israel mood and tenor and spirit on these campuses is noxious and terrible, and that Jewishly minded students or people or supporters of Israel go to these schools and then find themselves having to fight battles they should not have to fight and conduct themselves in activist ways they should not have to conduct themselves, simply to be able to express a very, very simple, plain opinion about what it is that their people are, what their people need, what the goals and aims of the Jewish people should be. It's a terrible thing that they should be burdened with this responsibility. Having said that, I think a lot of the fight has been very shockingly positive in that regard. And so I think we need to sort of acknowledge that while bemoaning the rise of and the sort of the investment of two generations of left-wing academics in the anti-Zionist project.
You know, it makes me think of the sociological effects of the Refusnik Soviet Jewry movement on the American Jewish community, that fighting for a great cause in the name of our people actually pulled a lot of people back to tradition in some way. It instilled in them a sense of Jewish pride that made them want to be Jewish and proud to be and happy to be Jewish, and instill that to their children. And I wonder if the experience of this generation having to confront their adversaries on campus could have a likely effect.
I think it could. I mean, this is obviously something we won't really know until the dust settles, you know, decades later. I think that the story of the last decade, not only on campus but globally, worldwide, is that the arguments not only of the BDS movement, but let's say of the pro-Palestinian anti-Israel movement, have simply been much more difficult to reconcile with the realities of the facts on the ground in the Middle East. That this argument that Israel is a colonial occupying power that oppresses the Palestinians has to confront at some point the fact that Israel unilaterally pulled out of Gaza, and that Israel does not have, even according to international law, governing authority over the Palestinians on the West Bank, that the Palestinians themselves have that authority. They're living under a corrupt, kleptocratic, autocratic, and old age regime led by somebody who was in the 15th year of his four-year term, and by a terrorist group running the other half. And those facts are very hard to reconcile with the notion that Israel is an evil occupying oppressor, that once you dig a little deeper beyond the slogan, you've got to do some work to make some of those arguments, and that Israel's own success in growing its economy, and now more lately having been the single most successful purveyor of the coronavirus vaccine, and having shown itself to be a country surprising to a lot of us who look at it and think that it's very dysfunctional. Particularly politically, that it was able to have this extraordinary success in vaccinating the entire country, is a story of success and not failure. And so the narrative that was so potent and so powerful, even 20 years earlier, has met reality in a very complicated way, and does give people a reason for a certain type of national, ethnic peoplehood pride that was not all that present in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when the problem was entirely this confrontation between Israel and the Palestinians, and who was at fault for how bad it was going.
We've been talking up to now about the experience of being on campus, about the challenges that confront Jewish students and conservative students there. I want to enter into the role that the university plays in America now. And I think that we ask, as Americans, our universities to do an awful lot of work. We ask the university to spearhead technical and scientific research. We ask the university to be a arena where young people from certain parents, certain families who go to school can have a kind of rite of passage, where they experience a kind of maturation and finishing into adulthood. We ask the universities to offer credentials that offer all kinds of market signals to who the people who go to universities are. And then there's that small matter of education. We ask the universities to teach our children stuff. Everything from, as I say, the most advanced natural science to social sciences and humanities and much else. It seems to me that because the university has to do all of those things, it makes sense for us to look and see what we can learn about the elite American culture and the meritocratic tendencies that you were evoking before in the discussion of unfair and unjust admission standards. When we look at the universities, what do we learn about the American elite?
We learn very little that's good. So meritocracy has developed a bad odor in this moment in which we talk about white privilege and white supremacy and income inequality and the fact that the higher up you get on the socioeconomic ladder, the easier it is for you to prosper, but that the ladder itself seems to have broken rungs at the bottom that make it very hard for people to climb up the way that they used to or the way that we want them to. I think the mistake here is that meritocracy is a goal or is an ideal, but that the actual meritocracy that exists, like all classes and like all groups of people, seeks to perpetuate its advantages over time. And so the problem here is that the meritocracy has been perpetuating its advantages in a way that is destructive in some ways of the American promise and the American experiment and the American dream, which is that they're making it, when you read that 43% of the incoming class at Harvard, we always focus on Harvard, but something like that is legacy. That's a staggering fact because, of course, admission to Harvard and graduation from Harvard is an instant ticket into the upper middle class. From the second you step on that campus through the end of your life, you have a credential that is the greatest of all American credentials, almost exclusively, and that this should be a perpetuated system of inherited aristocratic privilege is pretty shocking, as that value has increased over time, which it has. And so in a weird way, the thing to do when we're talking about the universities is ditch all the high-minded stuff. Ditch it, okay? Yes, we need universities to train scientists and mathematicians and engineers who are like going to build things so that they don't fall down or are going to come up with great inventions that will make our life better and all of that. So we take that like 7 or 8% of the university population that's going to do that, and we hope that they're not destroyed by the trends that everything is going on. Though, of course, we read about how now there is this question of whether or not mathematics is white, and which we start getting into fundamental questions of whether or not we have descended into absurdities of categorization and thought that really do bode like our civilization ending. But if we just put that to one side, we say, okay, do people really get educations at universities? Some do, not many, probably, not much, because the parts where you go to school to have fun and, drink and go to games and be in frats and sororities and have the greatest social experience of your life and just spend your late teens and early 20s in a kind of blissful party mode that is occasionally interrupted by the requirement to read a book or write a paper, right? That is a much more pressing matter for Americans. Like, it's much more pressing for most people to be at a school that has a good football team than a school that has a great English department, without question, right? So if I'm right about this, then the educational function of the university as a broad brush, 5,300 universities in the United States of all levels and of all kinds, yeah, they're not about education. They're about something else. So what are they about? They are about the credentialing that you mentioned, right? So now the question is it worth it? Because let's say you're a Jew, you want to send your kids to college, right? You don't want to send your kids to college. You have to send your kids to college. You are a bad parent. You have failed your people. You have failed your children. You have failed your family. If your kids do not go to college and get a college degree and that enables them to lead a professional life, unless they're so brilliant and they're so creative that they're Mark Zuckerberg and they can drop out because they invent the thing that's going to make them billionaires when they're 19. So what's it worth to you? Is it worth $250,000, $300,000 to go to school, get out of school, and have that golden ticket, particularly if you go to the 6 or 7 or 8 top schools in the country? You go to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Chicago, Stanford, Brown, Penn, something like that, right? You get out, and there you are. You're in. Just a question of where you go with it, and how you decide whether you go into business, you go into politics, you go into media, you go into whatever. You're in. If that's the case, then can you afford the $300,000 ticket? How many kids do you have? If you have 4, maybe that's a little expensive if you're not a billionaire. But maybe they take loans and whatever, you get this, you get that, and you went there, so you're buying that ticket, and you know what? Doesn't matter at all. Doesn't matter at all what kind of education they get. Doesn't matter if they're taught by TAs. Doesn't matter if they take batik and origami classes. It doesn't matter, because it's that piece of paper. It's the thing that the wizard says to the scarecrow at the end of The Wizard of Oz, right? I have men here who don't have any more brain than you, but they have something you don't have, a diploma. And so he gives the scarecrow the diploma, and suddenly the scarecrow can cite gobbledygook, garbage, pretentious, fancy-sounding language, and now he has a brain, because the brain is a piece of paper. So the piece of paper, your baccalaureate degree, your BA, whatever it is, that is your ticket into the upper middle class. So what is it worth to you? Because your kids are going to get a lousy education, or their heads are going to be filled with crap, or they're just going to drink for 4 years. Some of them, if they are really determined to get an education, will get an education. If you really want to get an education, if you're the sort of person, and I've known some, I think a lot of the TICFA scholars are people like this, they want to get an education, they will get an education, but they have to want it. The school is going to militate against their efforts. It is going to say it's more important to be diverse, it's more important to go to the football game. However the culture is conveyed at the school, it is not a particularly intellectual culture. So you just basically are making a calculation. Maybe you can't afford the $300,000, so your kid should go to a state school. Kids should go to a state school, not very intellectually minded, it's cheaper, it's in-state tuition, so it'll be $100,000 instead of $300,000. Is that good enough? Maybe if you go to Michigan, it's good enough. Maybe it's not so good if you go to Kentucky, or if you go to, I don't know, some state, the University of New Mexico. Maybe that's a lousy school. I don't even know. But that is the brutal bargain that Americans right now need to make or think about if they're thinking about sending their kids to school. What's it worth to you? How much are you willing to sacrifice out of your own pocket to basically take your kid and have this school warehouse him or her for 4 years to hand you that piece of paper? Because what happens there is not going to satisfy you, but maybe you don't need to be satisfied. You're also 3 generations removed from when these schools were really good. So if you're a parent, you graduated from college in the 80s or 90s or something like that, maybe you also had a garbage education. Maybe you don't know what a good education is anymore. It's not like you're like, when I was your age, we were being taught by Lionel Trilling. Lionel Trilling was long dead by then. Yeah, when the parents of these kids went to college.
The way that you put Jewish parents in front of that dilemma, I just want to sharpen it, because it's even more than you say. As we said earlier in the discussion, it's not only that they won't get a good education. by and large and for the most part. Of course, you and I both know excellent professors. But they are exceptions. It's by and large and for the most part, it's not only that students will have a hard time getting a great education. It's that the educational inputs and the social inputs and the ambient culture in which they find themselves will undo all the good things you've tried to do in raising your kids up to this point. And that's especially so for patriotic American and conservative parents and for religiously Jewish parents.
Well, that's the fear, right? And that's the threat. And that, again, gets to that same set of calculations somehow. What is it worth to you? Is your child's entry into the upper middle class through that ticket, is it worth the risk that you have laid out so powerfully? That is the crisis that we face. Just as you might say, do you want to send your kid, if you're a religious Jew in the 1940s, how important it is what is the threat of acculturation and assimilation? You're somebody, you have a kosher home, you live a separate and particularistic life. This remains the case, but I'm just sort of giving it a more stark contrast. You're going to send your kids off somewhere. There's no kosher food. There's no kosher kitchen. The Hillel system hasn't been invented yet, really. There may not be a lot of Jews there for them to meet, or Jews in proximity for them to meet and get married to. What risk are you taking by having them fully integrate into the American experience? And we know that the risk turned out to be very great, at least over the course of several generations. Intermarriage, re-intermarriage, the number of, the 50% in some cases, that the full integration of Jews into the American experience has been a catastrophic success. Look at the Biden administration. Like 7 or 8 of the senior officials of the Biden administration are Jewish. The White House Chief of Staff, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of State, the Director of National Intelligence, the Director of Homeland Security. Everybody is Jewish, right? How Jewishly conscious are they? Probably not all that much. It's like, what was that bargain? Ruth Weiss wrote a piece for commentary about Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State. He is 3 generations removed in his own family from a Yiddish writer and a deeply committed Zionist who was the son of the Yiddish writer, and he is now Secretary of State. And who is he going to be? Is he going to be the American or the Jew, or is he going to be a fully integrated American Jew who does not see any contradiction between the two? Or is he going to have to prove his bona fides as a full American official by screwing Israel? Like, we don't know the answer to all that. And I only bring that up to say that this is the perfect meritocratic life journey that Tony Blinken was on. I think he went to Harvard or Yale or something like that, and there he is, a fully 25 years as a leading American public policy player and a public official, now at the top of the greasy pole as Secretary of State. So was that a good deal for the Jews? I don't know.
Meaning, right, if that is the picture of success, the thing that parents would dream of, and for good reason. I mean, it's a good thing. That's what I want to try to bring out of this. It's a good thing for Jewish Americans to want to see their efforts and the efforts of their children in service to this great country. That's a good thing. But you've just brought out the very trade-off that we have to think through. I want to turn to more creative, more long-ranging thought with you. You've just put us, as I say, before this very difficult dilemma for every Jewish family to think through for themselves. But if we are thinking now as an institution, the sponsor of this conference, the Tikva Fund, has some dreams to try to address this problem, think through this problem. And I just want to walk through some of the possibilities. If one were to imagine and dream big, what could be done to ameliorate the problem that you've just diagnosed? So one alternative could be to set up your own thing. So you don't like what the universities are, so try to set up your own university. You think that's a good idea? What stands in the way from that happening?
Well, in a weird way, it's like you're trying to build a 19th century factory floor in the 21st century. I mean, these institutions are sclerotic, outdated, and make absolutely no sense in and of themselves in the world that we live in now. I mean, it makes no sense to take 17-year-old people, take them away from their homes, drop them in this place, and then have them drink for 4 years. That doesn't make any sense. It's not a growth experience. It's not an educational experience. And building one of these institutions is prohibitively expensive. I mean, you know, I know some people, we know people who have spent 20 years doing this in Israel at Shalem and stuff like that. You know, you need buildings, you need dormitories, you need land purchases, you need to have, you know, facilities and fields and other places where people can live off campus and all of that. All this grew naturally over the course of the 19th and early 20th centuries. The notion that you can incept a full-blown institution in 2021 seems insane. And again, it's beyond need. Like, you needed universities because if you really think about it, there needed to be a place where you could go to read books physically. That's what Oxford and Cambridge were. They were libraries. They were schools, but they were schools because they were repositories of intellectual information that were in codexes that needed to be physically handled by people if they were to read and take them in, right? That we don't have that anymore. You don't need a physical book anymore. You don't need a library to do research anymore. You don't need a librarian to get the book out of the stacks for you. You don't need to be in proximity to other people really to do all this work. So why would you in 2021 go this way? The radical solution would be not to go to university at all. Would be, if you want to be a fully educated person, the last thing you want to do is go to a university. Stay home. Don't spend any money. Do these multiple online do these MOOC courses. Study, listen to lectures. Read books. Start a Reddit group about Anthony Trollope, or a Discord chat group about Moses Mendelssohn, or Moses Maimonides, or any number of people that you could study, and then you can actually become an educated person without having to put up hundreds of thousands of dollars. But you have to do this while understanding that you are not going to get that piece of paper that makes it easier for you or for your child to end up in the upper middle class where that child is supposed to be. Now, we already have millions of people in the United States, and we're going to have way many more after the pandemic, who are homeschooling. This is essentially what I'm talking about, but it would be homeschooling at the college level. The more intellectually minded you are, maybe the worse college is for you, particularly if you're values-based or faith-based. On the other hand, the other thing is that maybe it's good to be challenged. Maybe it's good to have your priors. Maybe it's good to go to a place that tests your commitment to these ideas and principles that you have just breathed in over the course of your life. Because maybe it'll strengthen you, or maybe you aren't really going to be committed to them, and it's fair for you to have the intellectual experience to be challenged and say, this is not the life that I can live. As parents, and I have kids who are going to go off to college in the next couple of years, and I'm very much alarmed at what they might have to go through when they go there. And on the other hand, this is the world they live in, and this is who they are. And they can't be cauterized or vaccinated against the life of the mind that is the life of the mind in the world in which we gave them birth and brought them into. They have to make their way in the world as it is, not the world as we would wish it to be.
Well, that's a very important point. Maybe we should just end on this question, which is that there is something, a theological question, if you like. There is something essential about the Jewish people, our self-understanding as a people apart. That's fundamental to our calling and mission in the world. And there's some essential calling for our children to be armed, it seems to me, to fortify themselves to be a people apart as they enter into the campus environment.
Well, and I think a lot of us have made sacrifices for that very purpose. We've sacrificed by keeping kosher, which is a more difficult way to live than not to keep kosher. We've sacrificed by ponying up to send our kids to Jewish day schools when maybe we could have used that money to go to Disney World more frequently. We've done all kinds of things and committed ourselves to Jewish practice and Jewish principle and Jewish education and all of that. But at some point, the rubber has to meet the road. You can isolate, you can live a very particularistic life, you can try to, keep undue influences away from our kids and all of that, but whether they're 17 or they're 21 or whatever they are going to be in a full conversation and confrontation and argument with the secular world, with the anti-Israel world, with anti-Semitism, and with the fact that we are a tiny minority on this gigantic planet and a pretty tiny minority in the United States, notwithstanding our outsized success as a community. And so maybe, as I say, it's not worth it. It really isn't worth it to have that conversation and confrontation take place on the American campus today, because the American campus is so diseased in various different ways. But if it doesn't happen there, it's going to happen somewhere. It's going to happen on the iPhone. It's going to happen on the Discord app. It's going to happen in any manner of places, and ultimately whether the community can hang together, can be a credit to our people, can advance the interests of the Jewish people and keep us going, and keep us healthy and keep us strong. That's now up to them. And at some point, they're going to have to do it. And either they'll take on the challenge or they won't. And all you can do is give them the best foundation that you think you can. And then trust that they will make the right choices.
John Podhoretz, for helping us perceive these dilemmas so clearly and helping us reason our way into the complexity of the campus environment and the decisions that parents and grandparents and students now face. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.